Has science disproven God? No. In fact, this evolution is just a strong delusion that the world has been seduced by, that the world has been intoxicated by. It's just a controlled narrative by atheists. Atheists needed an answer that doesn't include God. So they invented evolution. They come up with evolution. Maybe things just created themselves. How convenient. Vastly complex biological systems just evolve gradually. And the information behind it just evolve gradually. I mean, it's such a convenient narrative, and the world said, shut up and take our money. Because the world wants nothing to do with God, but in fact, it is God who's given the world over to this delusion. Because it says in 2 Thessalonians 2:11 and 12, and for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So that this is why atheists deserve hell. Not because they are totally depraved, godless, creatures who hate God, but because they want to remain that way, and they invented this lie. But they didn't invent it. God gave them over to it. So what you've got to understand, atheists, you or anyone else who rejects the Son of God, or God, or the Bible, God, that you haven't rejected the Bible, you haven't rejected God, you haven't rejected His Son. God has rejected you and given you over to the reprobate mind, because so that you will be destroyed, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Right? And that's what evolution is, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Well, it says in 2 Corinthians 2:10, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth that they might be saved. So that's the thing, they have no love for the truth that they might be saved. I mean, how can I put it? It's one thing to be a polished turd, but it's another thing to want to remain a polished turd. And atheism is just that, for want of a better term. And they invented evolution as an answer, as a worldview. But the evidence is all just a crock. The evidence is nonsense. They'll take a jawbone, a fragment of a jawbone, and say, this is our ancestor. No, it's just a jawbone. Right? They expect us to believe that this was our ancestor, or they'll have fragmented bones or a skull, which is not human. And that's the only fact. It's not human, but they'll say that that's our ancestor, simply because they'll say, well, maybe it walked upright, and not everyone agrees that some things walked upright. There's not everyone actually agrees on the evidence as well. If you look into it, the evidence they give, there are people who don't agree, but it's all haphazard. Like, maybe this might have been, it's just based on fragmented bones that are not human. Or they'll say that because chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes and humans have 46, that the chimpanzee chromosome must have fused to create 46 or something like that. But I mean, it's so stupid. They just say that as if it's a gotcha argument, but there's so many questions. Like, what? So a monkey gave birth to something that had a fused chromosome, because chromosomes are created at conception. So how did that work? Robertsonian translocations creates Down syndrome and other factors that can affect your IQ, can affect your your physical development can affect giving birth and stuff like that. There's nothing, that's all detrimental. All chromosome disorders are harmful in human reproduction, and they never become a human phenomenon. They only cause problems, and you can pass those problems on, but they never become beneficial. But somehow we're supposed to believe that two chimpanzees or an ancestor of a chimpanzee and a human. Well, it has to be a chimpanzee, not an ancestor, common ancestor, because they say it's the fused chromosome is in us, but not in the chimpanzee. Or that was the difference. I don't know, but how did that change? It's just so they just say things that can't be verified. This bone is our ancestor, or maybe, or because chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes and we have 46, then we've identified a chromosome that was fused, and somehow we became human, because if you fuse these two chromosomes in a chimpanzee, it gives birth to a human. I mean, it's so stupid. It's contrary to all evidence, but it's such a strong delusion, they just make up this evidence, right? I mean, there's so many problems with the whole narrative, which I want to quickly go through. I mean, there's problems with evolution that they deny. That's why evolution isn't a science. They have this established dogma. I was just talking to a guy today. I said, he told me, I said, how do genomes change? How do chromosomes change and stuff like that? And he said, well, haven't you heard the chimpanzee's chromosome, whatever, fused? Okay. So I said, well, how does that happen? I gave him examples of the harmful effects of chromosome disorders, chromosome fusion, how it never becomes a universal phenomenon. He just said, well, that's all gobbledygook. He dismissed it as gobbledygook. And then he said, well, I suppose you can explain how the world's flat as well. So atheists, they huff and puff with their evolutionary dogma, but as soon as you challenge them, they deflate like the Hindenburg when it just crashed, went up in flames and crashed. They just crash and burn and resort to equivocation. And it's not science. It's a security blanket. It's an answer atheists have, and it's a controlled narrative because the godless world wants evolution. They don't want God. So they accept that a jawbone is evidence that we evolved. Or they accept these ideas that chromosomes confuse and create humans. But contrary to all observable fact, okay, they're making claims about things. It's not science. But there are problems with evolution. And I've got, how many of them? I've got 8. Right up. The first one. How did life begin without life? Right? How did life begin without life? Only life has the complex biological mechanisms to create life. And I say, well, that has nothing to do with evolution. But it's still a question. How did life create life? You can't answer it. Your evolution can't even get off the ground. And then number 2, how did this first life created by abiogenesis, survive long enough to develop the ability to replicate before abiogenesis stopped? Is that gobbledygook to you? It's because it goes against your narrative. So we're supposed to believe that somehow life was first created without life, some kind of chemical reaction, some kind of process that didn't involve life, right? It somehow created life, but somehow that process continued long enough for life to develop its own ability to replicate before that process finished, right? And you're used to simplistic answers like, oh, a jaw proves we evolved. Whee! Say evolution proved. You're not used to people asking questions or questioning it, and that's why you just deflate and fall apart and turn into babbling fools, right? You're just polished turds defending your desire to remain polished turds by this evolutionary narrative that has more problems, more holes in it than than Joe Biden's credibility as a leader. So the third problem is, so how did the first single-celled organism evolve into a multicellular organism? How did that happen? Happened somehow. Just because we don't know, it doesn't mean God did it. Multicellular organisms and bacteria is not multicellular. It's a colony of cells, but it's not a single multicellular organism. It's a colony of cells. But a multicellular organism has to have the information imprinted into the egg, so that and it needs a worm or an egg to house it, so that the cells can replicate according to the information to create the single-celled organism. So you need all that complex biological mechanisms to create a multicellular organism, right? Essentially, you need a man and a woman, a male and female, a worm, and a reproductive, and a means to insert the information into the egg, which carries half of the genome. So somehow that just happened. There's no answers for these things, and that's why I love to bring them up. And evolutionists just fall apart and crash and burn, and just and I love to see it, but they can't, because they would rather accept the lie than have anything to do with God, and that's why they deserve hell. Not because they're polished turds, but they want to remain polished turds. And the next question: what evolved first, flora or fauna, and how? If we all evolved from a common ancestor, at what point did one become a plant cell and another an animal cell? Because they are different, very different, right? And they do completely different things, right? One survives on photosynthesis, and the other one survives on digesting proteins and stuff. So it's totally different. Number 5 problem: what evolved first, the vertebrate or the invertebrate, and how? At what point did bones develop, and why? If it were just a blob or a cell, everything it's already reducibly complex, and it can't happen. How did genomes radically change? Type in Robertsonian translocations and see the problems with them. And you need vastly complex genomes for that to happen in the first place. What evolved first? Number 7, the man or the woman. At what point did replication need reproduction? And you can't just say, oh, some lizard can change its sex. But it doesn't evolve into anything. And it doesn't become a universal phenomenon amongst all species. It's just unique to that species. And the uniqueness is what makes evolution, bridging the gaps, impossible. But they say simple things like, oh, some lizard can change its sex. Therefore, we evolved into man and woman. It's just so stupid. They just say evolution, or they'll say small changes over time lead to big changes. It's this all simplistic dogma with unverifiable claims and claims that go against biology. And the last one: how can some species stop evolving while others around them kept evolving, as in the case of living fossils? There's a lot of living fossils. There's fully developed birds and living birds, fossilized, some trapped in amber. There's insects, and there's fish, and all sorts of different species that are still alive today that are with the dinosaurs, right? They're here today. And they're found in the fossil records. But somehow and evolutionists will say, well, they found their evolutionary niche. There's nothing unique about them. I mean, there's so many contradictions. One, they'll say that all whole species change through allele frequencies over time. And that's another, and that's allele frequencies are just frequencies of existing information. That it doesn't create new information, and in fact, it loses information over time, or the information deteriorates through Robertsonian translocations, right? What was I saying? Yeah. So how can all these species, like they say that whole species change over time for reproduction, essentially. Oh, reproduction, nothing's the same. It all changes over time. But a fish is still a fish. A man is still a man. A monkey is still a monkey. Even though our human race has grown dramatically population-wise, still 23 pairs of chromosomes. We're only getting more problems due to natural selection than none. You know, the more we reproduce, the more we grow, the longer we survive, the more bigger problems occur, more mutations cause harm and are passed on. We don't see an evolving into something better. We see men becoming more stupid, right? We don't see, and Robertsonian translocations actually does affect intellect. So there's a lot of people who can have them kind of problems, and they look normal, but they just have a low IQ, and we call them the left. That's where you get the left from. The left are just all these people with Robertsonian translocations who look like people, but their IQ is affected. They have a low IQ. That's the only explanation for the left that I can think of. Yes, but it's one thing to believe a lie because everyone told you a lie, because evolution is a controlled narrative and that's what they tell you at school. But it's another thing once that lie is exposed for you to hold to it and argue for it or equivocate. Then you prove that you love that lie rather than the truth because your deeds are evil. Evolution is darkness, evolution is a lie. I used to believe it because that's all I was told. But evolution is proof of your condemnation. It is proof of why you deserve hell. Where is it? John number 1. Hold on. Oh no. Here it is. It's John 3:19 actually. I'll finish with your only hope. Okay? Evolution is a lie. We can't evolve. Biology is vastly irreducibly complex. The evidence for evolution is just smoke and mirrors, like this bone proves we evolved. Somehow, or somehow chromosomes fused and produced something better, evolved into something better somehow at one time. Like it had to be an individual phenomenon, like one baby was created with a fused chromosome, and then somehow it became a universal phenomenon that created human race, contrary to all evidence that chromosome disorders and mistakes actually are harmful. Or there's God, but you just don't want nothing to do with it. But why God hasn't destroyed you yet? Because he's given you a chance. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is it. This is where evolution comes in. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. Okay, so you love evolution rather than the truth because your deeds are evil. Essentially, you're a polished turd, and you want to remain a polished turd, and that's why you deserve hell, because God has given you a way out, and a way out to believe in his Son. He's given you a way out. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. But in conclusion, has science disproven God? No. It's just proven that you just love darkness rather than light because your deeds are evil. This evolution is not a science. It's a narrative created by atheists. And the world said, shut up and take our money, because we don't want nothing to do with God. We want to sin. We want to remain polished turds. And we love the company of polished turds. And we want to get by and have a wonderful life and world without God. But you're not going to have a wonderful life in hell, because you deserve hell. And I will gladly hold the door open as you're going in, simply because you pretty much argued your way into hell. You chose this. So there you go. I will gladly open the door for you, atheists. God's given you what you want, hell. But the irony is, you will want nothing but God there, because you won't be able to have him. There'll be no chance for that.